In California, the division of property into parcels is governed by the California Subdivision Map Act, specifically Government Code Sections 66,410 through 66,499.37. The purpose of the Act is to ensure land division aligns with local land use planning and protects public health, safety, and welfare. In the absence of specific regulations prohibiting the feeding of one building from another when the buildings are located on different properties, the following land and real estate law considerations may be relevant. Firstly, easements. An easement is a legal right granting one person the use of another's property for a specific purpose. An easement could be created to allow running electrical wires or other utilities from one property to the other. Secondly, covenants and restrictions. Covenants and restrictions are agreements imposed on a property by a developer or homeowners association limiting property use. For example, a covenant or restriction could prohibit using one property to supply utilities to another. Thirdly, zoning laws. Zoning laws regulate land use within an area, specifying allowed building types and their uses. Zoning laws could prohibit using one property to provide utilities to another. In addition to land and real estate law considerations, the following factors may also be relevant. 1. Safety. Feeding one building from another may pose safety risks, such as electrical fires or explosions. 2. Maintenance. Who is responsible for maintaining the electrical wires or other utilities used to feed one building from another? 3. Impact on property values. The feeding of one building from another could negatively impact surrounding property values. Based on these considerations, it would be prudent to deny the proposal to feed one building from another when the buildings are located on different properties. Potential land and real estate law issues could arise along with safety, maintenance, and property value concerns. The California Subdivision Map Act aims to ensure that land is divided in a manner consistent with local land use planning. It also has the purpose of protecting public health, safety, and welfare. When dealing with the electrical feed between two buildings on separate properties, several elements of land and real estate law become pertinent. The concept of easements is critical. An easement, as a legally recognized right, allows an individual or entity to utilize another person's property for a defined and specific purpose. In the context of supplying electrical power from one building to another across separate properties, establishing an easement is a potential method for formalizing and legitimizing this arrangement. The easement would grant the property owner receiving the electrical feed the right to run the necessary electrical lines across the adjacent property. It is important to have this in place. Covenants and restrictions also play a role. These agreements are typically imposed on properties by developers or homeowners associations and can significantly restrict how a property can be used. It is important to check on these limitations. These restrictions could, in some cases, explicitly prohibit using one property to provide utilities to another. Therefore, carefully examining any existing covenants and restrictions is necessary to determine if they would prevent the proposed electrical feed. Zoning laws are another factor. Zoning regulations are established by local governments to control and regulate how land can be used within specific areas. These laws dictate the types of buildings that are permitted on a property and the purposes for which those buildings can be used. They could also regulate or restrict the extension of utilities from one property to another. Checking local zoning ordinances is crucial to ascertain whether the proposed electrical feed complies with these regulations. Beyond the legal considerations related to land and real estate, several practical factors should be taken into account. Safety is paramount. Connecting the electrical systems of two buildings on separate properties could introduce safety hazards, increasing the risk of electrical fires or other incidents. A comprehensive safety assessment should be conducted by a qualified electrician to identify and mitigate potential risks. Maintenance responsibilities should be clarified. A formal agreement should outline who is responsible for maintaining the electrical wiring and equipment that connects the two buildings. This agreement should specify who bears the cost of repairs and maintenance, as well as the process for resolving any disputes. The potential impact on property value should also be considered. The arrangement for supplying electricity from one property to another could affect the property values of both properties. For instance, prospective buyers might view the arrangement as a negative factor, potentially decreasing the property value. It is essential to evaluate these potential implications before proceeding. It is also important to consider the legal and regulatory landscape surrounding the electrical fee between two buildings. Firstly, the National Electrical Code, or NEC. While Section 225.30 of the NEC specifically addresses the number of supplies to one building or other structure, its direct applicability to buildings on separate properties may be limited. However, other provisions of the NEC, such as those related to wiring methods, overcurrent protection, and grounding, would still apply to ensure the safety and reliability of the electrical installation. Secondly, local building codes and regulations. Local jurisdictions may have their own building codes and regulations that govern electrical installations. These codes may impose additional requirements or restrictions on the electrical fee between two buildings on separate properties. Therefore, consulting with the local building department is essential to ensure compliance. Thirdly, utility company regulations. The local utility company may have regulations regarding the supply of electricity to multiple properties from a single service connection. These regulations may address issues such as metering, billing, and the allocation of electrical load. Contacting the utility company is necessary to understand the requirements and obtain any necessary approvals. Given the complexities and potential legal and practical issues associated with this arrangement, it is advisable to seek professional guidance. Consulting with a qualified real estate attorney who is familiar with California law is recommended. They can provide legal advice on easements, covenants, zoning regulations, and other relevant legal considerations. Consulting with a licensed electrical engineer can ensure that the electrical installation meets all applicable safety standards and codes. This includes conducting load calculations, selecting appropriate wiring methods, and providing overcurrent protection. Consulting with a real estate appraiser can assess the potential impact of the arrangement on the property values of both properties. This assessment can help to determine whether the arrangement is financially viable. While there may not be a specific regulation explicitly prohibiting the practice of feeding one building from another across separate properties, a conservative approach is warranted. Given the potential complexities, legal considerations, and safety concerns, it is often prudent to advise against such an arrangement unless it can be demonstrated that all applicable regulations and codes are met, and that all parties involved are fully aware of the potential risks and liabilities. It is important to ensure the safety and legal compliance of electrical installations and property arrangements. Thorough due diligence and professional guidance are key to making informed decisions and avoiding potential problems. The NEC addresses the situation of multiple buildings or structures supplied by a single service. Section 225.30 specifically places restrictions on the number of supplies permitted to feed a single building or structure. However, the question at hand introduces a nuance because the two buildings are located on separate properties, which changes the way the code is applied. When buildings are on the same property, the NEC provides clear guidelines to ensure safety and proper electrical distribution. These guidelines address issues such as the number of feeders or branch circuits, overcurrent protection, grounding, and disconnecting means. The intent is to prevent overloading the service, to minimize hazards, and to facilitate safe maintenance and repairs. When the buildings are on separate properties, it introduces additional layers of complexity. The absence of explicit rules in Section 225.30 for this scenario does not necessarily mean that such installations are permissible or safe. Instead, it necessitates a more comprehensive examination of other applicable codes, regulations, and legal considerations. One of the primary concerns when supplying one building from another across separate properties is establishing clear legal rights to do so. This typically involves the creation of an easement. An easement grants the owner of one property the legal right to use a portion of another property for a specific purpose. In this case, the easement would allow the electrical conductors to run across the adjacent property. The easement should be properly documented and recorded with the local land records to ensure its validity and enforceability. Without a legally established easement, the property owner running the electrical supply could face legal challenges or be required to remove the installation. Local zoning and land use regulations also come into play. These regulations dictate how land can be used within a given jurisdiction and may impose restrictions on the placement of structures or utilities. It is essential to consult with the local zoning department to determine if the proposed electrical supply arrangement complies with all applicable regulations. Some jurisdictions may require permits or approvals before allowing such an installation. Beyond the legal aspects, safety is paramount. The electrical installation must comply with all applicable requirements of the NEC and other relevant safety standards. This includes ensuring that the conductors are properly sized for the load, that overcurrent protection is provided, and that the system is properly grounded. A qualified electrician should perform a thorough evaluation of the existing electrical systems in both buildings to determine if they are adequate to handle the additional load. If necessary, upgrades may be required to ensure the safety and reliability of the installation. Another consideration is the impact on the utility company's infrastructure. The utility company may have specific requirements for how multiple buildings are supplied with electricity from a single service connection. These requirements may address issues such as metering, billing, and the allocation of electrical load. It is essential to consult with the utility company to understand their requirements and obtain any necessary approvals. In summary, while Section 225.30 of the NEC may not explicitly address the scenario of supplying one building from another across separate properties, it does not automatically imply that such installations are permissible. A comprehensive evaluation of legal, safety, and regulatory considerations is necessary. This evaluation should include the establishment of a legally valid easement, compliance with local zoning and land use regulations, adherence to all applicable electrical codes and safety standards, and consultation with the local utility company. If, after careful consideration, it is determined that the proposed installation is not feasible or compliant with all applicable requirements, it is best to explore alternative solutions, such as installing a separate service for each building. It is important to note that the specific requirements and regulations may vary depending on the jurisdiction. Therefore, it is always advisable to consult with qualified professionals such as real estate attorneys, electrical engineers, and local building officials to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. The primary issue at hand involves two buildings on different properties under the same ownership, with a proposal to supply electrical power from one building to the other. While Section 225.30 of the National Electrical Code addresses the number of supplies to one building, it mainly concerns situations where multiple buildings are on the same property. The key question here is whether the absence of specific rules for buildings on separate properties implies permissibility or if other regulations come into play. When buildings are on separate properties, several legal and practical considerations must be taken into account. The most crucial aspect is the establishment of an easement. An easement is a legal right granted to one party to use another party's property for a specific purpose. In this scenario, an easement would be required to allow the electrical conductors to run from one property to the other. The easement must be properly documented, recorded, and legally binding to ensure that the arrangement is lawful and can be maintained over time. Without a valid easement, the property owner supplying the electricity could face legal challenges and be forced to remove the electrical connection. Local zoning and land use regulations also play a significant role. These regulations dictate how land can be used within a specific area and may impose restrictions on utility connections between separate properties. It is imperative to consult with the local zoning department to determine if the proposed electrical supply arrangement complies with all applicable regulations. Some jurisdictions may require permits or approvals before allowing such an installation. In addition to legal considerations, safety is of utmost importance. The electrical installation must adhere to all applicable requirements of the National Electrical Code and other relevant safety standards. This includes ensuring that the conductors are properly sized for the load, that overcurrent protection is provided, and that the system is properly grounded. A qualified electrician should conduct a thorough evaluation of the existing electrical systems in both buildings to determine if they are adequate to handle the additional load. Upgrades may be necessary to ensure the safety and reliability of the installation. The utility company's requirements must also be taken into account. The utility company may have specific regulations for how multiple buildings are supplied with electricity from a single service connection. These regulations may address issues such as metering, billing, and the allocation of electrical load. It is essential to consult with the utility company to understand their requirements and obtain any necessary approvals. While the National Electrical Code may not explicitly prohibit the practice of supplying one building from another across separate properties, it does not automatically imply that such installations are permissible. A comprehensive evaluation of legal, safety, and regulatory considerations is necessary to determine the feasibility and compliance of the proposed arrangement. The best course of action is to take a cautious approach and thoroughly investigate all potential issues before proceeding with the installation. Consulting with qualified professionals such as real estate attorneys, electrical engineers, and local building officials is highly recommended to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. If it is determined that the proposed installation is not feasible or compliant with all applicable requirements, it is best to explore alternative solutions, such as installing a separate service for each building. The decision to allow or deny the proposal should be based on a careful assessment of all relevant factors and a commitment to ensuring the safety and legality of the electrical installation. It is essential to prioritize safety and legal compliance to avoid potential problems in the future.